when the Supreme Court of India building was going to be constructed, there were considerations, of course, on its architectural style. And the chief of the Central Public Works Department, he considered the Indo-British architectural style, which is the same style that is used in Lutyens, Delhi, where the Supreme Court of India is located. So that was the aesthetic that he selected to maintain that same aesthetic. And this style, this Indo-British style, it's a unique blend of local architectural elements and cultural traces that represent colonial power, and that's its identity. And so in doing so, the architect made sure that the structure reflected aspects of both colonial and post-colonial cultures. When the Supreme Court Observer asked me to write something about the Supreme Court of India on the occasion of the 75 years of the Supreme Court, my eyes immediately went to the building of the Supreme Court, the architecture, the structure, and of course that central rotunda, that circle under which is seated the Chief Justice of India's courtroom. And I immediately thought, on this architecture, you can see the importance and relevance of it. And that's exactly what this article brings to the fore. It covers the history of the Supreme Court of India's building, where the Supreme Court of India used to function from, how it came about to this building, and what exactly the design and structure means, and the role that that circle plays, and that hence the name of the article, Justice in Circles, based on the circular main centerpiece of the Supreme Court of India. The article also looks very interestingly at how the Supreme Court stands in a very unique position, wherein it follows certain colonial practices and traditions. However, as we know, the Supreme Court of India is a post-colonial construct. It was constructed after independence. And however, India adopted the common law system that came to us from the British at the time of independence. So the legal system was adopted from there and came with its certain practices and traditions. But the Supreme Court, having been constructed after independence, has the opportunity to create its own legacy and its own practices and customs. And you will see that in some parts, but you won't see it in others. And the article kind of looks and walks through that dichotomy, and the certain aspects which you can see it through, and which this is observable through, is the dress code that is implemented on lawyers, the architecture itself of the building, then the depiction and the various interpretations of the statue of justice that you see in colonial courts and you see in the Supreme Court of India. And looking at this entire history of these different registers, of these in different aspects, the question comes to us about where the Supreme Court stands today, what the institution considers as its colonial legacy, and how much of that colonial legacy it wants to continue and how much of it wants to let go of. And today, as we stand at the juncture of the 75 years of the Supreme Court, it's a question that the court can ask, that we can discuss, we can debate, and we can decide on how much of that colonial tradition we want to continue, how much we want to let go, and where we stand today, 75 years later. The first three colonial high courts of India, that is the high courts in Calcutta, Bombay and Madras, they were clearly colonial structures, and they were built to create a colonial identity. They were a symbol of the colonial power at that time. Whereas the Supreme Court of India was completed, this particular building was completed in 1958, and it was a post-colonial construct. However, you will see certain overlaps in the cultural practices, in the architectural styles. For example, a court is always elevated so that you have to look up at the court and be in awe of the court, and the windows are always larger than life, and they look welcoming and inviting, but if you go to see them, they don't open. And these aspects, you can see this kind of architectural trends, they follow through in the colonial courts and in the post-colonial court. And in different ways, you also see this carrying forward in the insistence on the dress, which they insist on in the colonial high courts, and it is also interested in the Supreme Court of India. So you do see some kind of architectural language overlapping between a colonial and a post-colonial court.